Extreme Monsters Book 3. Meet Mr. Hydeous. Chapter 8. What if? Mumford, Steiner, Jinx, and Wolf watched Val compete in the snowboarding super pipe event. The practice half-pipe Doc had built in his backyard had been great, but this super pipe was spectacular. 400 feet long, 15-foot walls, and an 18-foot transition. At this event, each rider would do a single run. Judges would give points for height, creativity, difficulty, and for using the entire length of the pipe. The snowboarders were awesome. Mumford watched open-mouthed as each one dropped in and busted. Then it was Val's turn. Val began fakie, twisted his shoulder clockwise, and bent his knee as he kept spinning, looking backwards, and landed riding forward. A great cab 540. He was boarding great. Val was hitting the verts and grabbing great air. Next came method air. He ollied super high, grabbed the board between his heels, pulled the board level with his head, and threw his other hand high in the air. Val went huge, 15 feet out. He unleashed back-to-back inverted 540 spinners with a 720 McTwist, a 720-degree backside rotation with a front flip. He landed riding fakie. He concluded his run with a frontside 900, spinning 2.5 times around, 15 feet in the air. The audience roared its approval. Mumford and Steiner high-fived each other. Val totally nailed it, Mumford said. Even Mr. Hydeous can't beat those tricks. But Mumford was wrong. Mr. Hydeous was the last to board. He took a slug from his sports bottle and dropped into the super pipe. From the beginning, he went way huge, 15 to 20 feet in the air. He did several of the tricks Val had done. A cab, but with a 720 spin. A method air 20 feet out. He pushed the turns harder, higher, faster. It was as if he had chosen his tricks deliberately to prove he was better than Val. He finished with inverted back-to-back 900-degree spinners with a crippler air, an inverted aerial with a 180-degree flip, and then, as his final trick, he did a huge alley-oop cab 1018, 1080, a triple spin with a mute air grab. If the audience had gone wild over Val, its response to Mr. Hydeous was volcanic. It erupted in screams and applause. Steiner frowned uncertainly. You know, something about his moves looked really familiar. Love shrugged. Dude, we saw him on TV yesterday. Of course they're familiar. That was amazing, said Mumford. No joke, Steiner said. More like impossible. No, said Mumford. That was the same trick that Gerald tried to get me to do, only more pumped up. Hydeous whipped off his helmet and goggles, grinning like crazy. They waited for the scores as he posed and took another slug from his yellow pendant sports bottle. Then Mumford felt the green-skinned team look right at him, and that scornful look felt too familiar. Mumford flashed on the kitchen of Doc's house, and Gerald holding the flask filled with a potion that would make Mumford a winner. The judges announced their decision. Mr. Hydeous won the event. Val came in second. Mumford got a sinking feeling.
Since the note was Vale Games have only 5 losers registered, junior men and women will race against each other,
T-Rex announced. Jinx grinned as she waited, wearing a tight, rubberized black luge suit with no padding to interfere with her aerodynamics or keep her from getting hurt if she wiped out. But then, she didn't plan to wipe out. She knew that in bigger events, men and women raced separately, but she figured she could hold her own against all comers, male or female, especially as she was allowed to wear a weight vest with pieces of lead sewn into it to make her heavier on her sled. For now, she held her helmet with its face shield that had been specially rounded to reduce wind drag, and waited eagerly for the first run. Jinx would sled 5th at the end of the run, so she'd know what number she had to beat. In the luge race, Mr. Hydeous drew an early start. Dressed in his tight-fitting yellow suit, he struck his superstar pose and glugged from his sports bottle. The official checked his neutralizer wristband. Then Hydeous put on his aerodynamic yellow helmet and spiked yellow gloves. Steiner, Mumford, Val, and Wolf were subdued as they waited near the finish line while, far above, Hydeous settled onto the seat of his luge. Despite the cold, Jinx's bat, Bela, insisted on perching on Steiner's square head to watch the race.
See Jinx win,
he squeaked resolutely.
See?
Wolf teased the bat.
See, you know you'll just hide your eyes when she whips around those hairpin turns. Why not get back in Steiner's nice warm pocket?
But the shivering bat was determined.
Jinx will turn you into a frog if you let Bela freeze,
Val warned Steiner.
I hear you,
Steiner said. He took his scarf from his neck and began to wrap it around the tiny bat. Wolf, Val, and Mumford burst out laughing. It looked like Steiner was wearing a red, fuzzy turban with a bat head sticking out the top.
Hey, I'm not the only funny dresser at these games,
said Steiner.
Yeah, Mr. Hydeous looks like a rubber ducky,
Wolf muttered as he looked up the hill. For a moment, they'd almost forgotten about Mr. Hydeous. Now, as they peered up the luge track, their hilarity faded. Mr. Hydeous was no laughing matter. They watched as Hydeous hit the ice with his spiked gloves to start his run. Then Hydeous disappeared as he lay flat on the luge to slide feet first down the track. From her higher vantage point, Jinx could see Hydeous rocketing down at incredible speed. She guessed he was approaching 80 miles per hour. Back and forth he zipped, taking the turns precisely and with nearly superhuman speed. But on the last few turns, he was fast on the curves and almost spun out. He leaned up to save himself and slowed way down. His steering became awkward. When he passed the finish line, it almost looked like he was having trouble stopping his sled.
What's with that?
Jinx thought. Not that she was complaining. Maybe, just maybe, she'd have a chance to beat that conceited jerk. Mumford was watching Hydeous suspiciously. He saw that as Hydeous rose from his sled, He had his helmet off and was gulping from a small bottle he must have hidden in his vest. As his time was called, an incredible 43.152 seconds, he rose and waved at the crowd.
Yeah, Mumford thought. Mr. Hydeous was definitely greener and longer fanged than ever.
For the first time, he put his growing suspicion into words, at least in his own mind.
Could Mr. Hydeous actually be Gerald? Gerald did invent that formula. Should I tell the others what I'm thinking?
He wondered.
But if I tell, it will mean telling about the formula Gerald made, and I promised I wouldn't.
If Gerald was cheating, that wouldn't be right. But it wasn't right to break a promise either. He didn't know what to do.
Steiner, Mumford said, what should I do if I promise somebody something and... Well, then you do it. You keep your word,
Steiner said absently. He was looking anxiously toward the top of the track where Jinx was getting ready to make her turn. He wasn't really listening to what Mumford was saying. Mumford felt confused and anxious. If he told his suspicion to betray Gerald, he would be breaking a promise. And what if he was wrong?
But what if I'm right? He thought. If I don't tell, doesn't that mean I'm betraying my own team?
Jinx is up now, Steiner said. Miserably, Mumford looked up the hill. Jinx sat on the seat of her luge. The seat was called a sling, and pulled her sled through a set of handles. She pushed off with her spiked gloves on the icy track, lay smoothly back, and began her feet-first slide down the luge track. Jinx knew there were 16 zigs and zags in the course. She knew her eyes left and right without lifting her head to orient herself on the track. She counted off each zig and zag as she went through it. When she knew a curve was coming up, she pushed on the runners and used shoulder and foot pressure on the sides of the luge to steer into the turn. Since a luge sled doesn't have brakes, she held up the front of the sled, pushing the backs of the runners into the ice and using friction to slow its speed. Then, using precise body movements, she steered the sled out of that dangerous hairpin turn and on to the next. Jinx knew she would have to steer very precisely through all 16 treacherous curves to equal or surpass the amazing time of Mr. Hydeous. In less than a minute, she was past the finish line and sitting up, waiting breathlessly for her time, 43.160 seconds. It was the best luge time she'd ever had. She should be ecstatic, but she wasn't. Despite his trouble at the end, the invincible Mr. Hydeous had beaten her by 8 1/1000ths of a second.